In this lesson, we are looking at one specific but important step in the 5G registration flow, the security mode command. It happens after the network has started authenticating the user and before the UE finishes registration with sensitive information. The page you see is a map of that exchange. On the left is the UE talking to the GNB over the radio link. In the middle is the AMF, which controls access and security. On the right are the core network functions that help with identity, subscription data, authentication, and policy. The diagram also shows the numbered sequence of messages, from the initial UE message through authentication and finally the security mode command. The key idea is simple. Before the network asks the phone to resend a protected registration request, both sides need to agree on security. The AMF selects the NAS security algorithm, tells the UE which key set to use, and asks the UE to prove it is ready to continue securely. Then the UE responds with security mode complete and repeats the registration request inside a protected context. So as we move through the flow, keep two questions in mind. First, what is each network function doing? Second, what is changing in the message itself? That is the heart of the security mode command procedure. Establish trust, select protection, and then continue registration with sensitive fields safely carried under security. Let's start at the beginning of the sequence. The GNB forwards the UE's initial UE message to the AMF, which means the device has entered the 5G core control plane and is asking to register. From there, the AMF begins the authentication path. In the diagram, step 2 is AUSF discovery, and step 3 is the UE authenticate request and answer. This is the network finding the right authentication service and preparing the subscription-based challenge. The authentication pieces live in the core, so the AMF does not make trust decisions alone. Instead, it consults the authentication infrastructure and retrieves the material needed to run 5G AKA. Why is that important? Because registration is not just about attaching to a cell. The network must decide whether this device is allowed in, whether its subscriber identity is valid, and whether the session should be linked to the correct subscription context. That is why you see functions like AUSF, UDM, and UDR grouped in the register area of the diagram. This part of the flow establishes the security basis for everything that follows. Before any NAS security algorithm can be activated, the core must complete authentication, derive the necessary keys, and get ready to tell the UE how the protected part of registration will work. Now we reach the authentication exchange itself. Step 4 on the page is authentication request and response, and step 5 is the 5G AKA confirmation. This is the moment when the network and the UE prove that they share the right authentication state. Think of 5G AKA as the bridge between identity and trust. The UE answers a challenge, the core verifies the response, and both sides derive session keys from the successful run. Those keys are not yet the final protected conversation, but they are what makes the next step possible. This is also why the diagram places the AMF in the center. The AMF is coordinating the signaling, but the trust material is coming from the authentication and subscriber services behind it. Once the response is accepted, the AMF knows it can move from plain authentication signaling into security activation. At this point, the network has enough confidence to choose an NAS security algorithm and tell the UE how to continue. That transition matters. Authentication says, I believe you are the right subscriber. Security mode says, now let's protect what we say next. So if you remember only one thing from this stage, remember the handoff. Authentication proves legitimacy, and then the security mode procedure turns that legitimacy into an encrypted and integrity-protected registration path. Step 6 is the core of this page. Security mode command from the AMF to the GNB, followed by security mode complete, and the repeated registration request from the GNB back to the AMF. Look at the request block on the page. The downlink NAS transport carries a security mode command message. Inside it are three ideas that matter most. First, NAS security algorithms. The AMF is telling the UE which protection scheme to use. Second, the NAS key set identifier, or NGKSI. This tells the UE which key context is active. Third, the IMEI ISV request. The AMF is asking for the device identity in a secure way. The text on the page also says the AMF requests the UE to resend the registration request so sensitive information can be sent securely, for example, SMS support. That is an important design pattern in 5G. The first registration request may be enough to start the process, but some fields should only be carried after security has been enabled. So the security mode command is not a random extra message. It is the point where the network says, "We have authenticated you. Now lock the channel down and repeat the important parts under protection." That is why this message sits between authentication and full registration. It turns a successful login-like exchange into a secure ongoing control plane session. Finally, the UE answers with security mode complete, and the page shows that it does so together with a new registration request inside the uplink NAS transport. That response tells the AMF two things. The UE has accepted the selected NAS security parameters, and it is ready to continue registration using the protected channel. Notice the example fields in the response block. The message type is security mode complete, and the included registration request now contains identity and capability information such as the SUPI format, type of identity, requested NSSAI, SMS support, and user location information. The page also shows the IMEI SV value, which is the device's identity variant version. This is the practical reason for the procedure. The network can now safely receive fields that are too sensitive to leave in the clear. The repeated registration request is still the same logical step, but it is now happening after the security context has been activated. If you zoom out, the whole sequence is elegant. Initial registration starts the conversation. Authentication proves who the UE is. Security mode command selects how to protect the conversation. Security mode complete confirms the protection and lets the registration continue securely. So whenever you see this diagram, read it as a handoff from trust establishment to protected service setup. That is the role of the security mode command in 5G. It is the gate that converts an initial connection attempt into a secure registered session. Before we wrap up, let's unpack the small fields that make this page useful for protocol reading. In the request section, the security mode command is carried in downlink NAS transport. That matters because the AMF is not speaking directly to the application layer of the phone. It is talking to the NAS layer, the mobility and registration control plane that sits between the UE and the core. The message includes the NAS security algorithms, which are the protection choices for confidentiality and integrity. It also includes the NAS key set identifier, or NGKSI, so the UE knows which key context the AMF expects it to use. If the key identifier did not match, the UE and network would not agree on the same security state. Another key field is the IMEI ISV request. The page says the AMF requests the IMEI from the UE and notes that the message contains the IMEI ISV. This is a reminder that the procedure is not only about encryption, it is also about identity handling, device checks, and policy decisions that depend on secure transport. That is why the diagram places EIR, UDM, UDR, and AUSF nearby in the broader 5G core context. So when you read the block, don't see it as a long list of parameters. See it as a compact contract. Here is the algorithm. Here is the key context. Here is the device identity request. And here is the command that moves registration into a protected mode. Now look at the response side. Security mode complete is the UE saying, I understood your algorithm choice. I accepted the security context, and I can continue. Immediately after that, the UE repeats the registration request so the sensitive pieces can be sent in the secured context. That repeated request is where the example fields become important. You see the SUPI format, type of identity, the requested NSSAI, SMS support, and user location information. These are all registration details that help the core bind the user to the right subscription, slice, and service capabilities. Why repeat the request instead of just continuing from the original one? Because the first registration attempt may be enough to trigger authentication, but not enough to safely carry every value the network wants. Security mode turns the signaling channel into a trusted channel, and only then does the UE resend the registration information that should not travel in the clear. This pattern is useful beyond this single page. Many 5G procedures follow a similar rhythm. Discover the right service, authenticate the subscriber, activate protection, then exchange the sensitive data. If you can spot that rhythm in a flowchart, you can usually understand where you are in the control plane. So the final mental model is simple. Authentication proves identity, security mode protects the conversation, and the repeated registration request completes the transition into a secure 5G registration session.